What would have happened if the Straw Hats were reborn with all their memories? Would they be able to change all the bad things that have happened to them, or would it make their journey even worse? Well, before we answer that, let's start with Luffy. Being reborn with all of his memories, Luffy would be confused, but he would try to keep quiet about the situation. He would do this in order to relive his childhood in the same way, spending his time with Ace and Sabo. Of course, since he's Luffy, he would slip up now and then, but not enough to raise any suspicion. He'd still eat the Nika fruit even in this scenario, but Shanks wouldn't lose his arm saving him since Luffy would be smart enough to avoid the bandit. After some time, Luffy would even start training his haki on his own and would single-handedly defeat the Blue Jam Pirates. In order to let Ace and Sabo live their life, he would let both of them go the same way they did in the main story, knowing that both of them would eventually end up with people who would care about them. Once he turned 17, Luffy would also leave the island himself and meet up with Kobe again on Alvida's boat. After dealing with Alvida, they'd head straight for Shell's Town to pick up Zoro. Now, before they do that, I need to explain what happened to Zoro in this timeline, since his backstory is completely different now. Obviously, now that he's been reborn, Zoro's first thoughts were to start training as hard as he can. Due to everything he knows about swordsmanship, he easily defeated Kuina during their duels, and she actually had to catch up to him this time around. However, I still believe the two would become really good friends and make a promise to each other. With his future memories, Zoro might even be able to save Kuina from dying in this version, warning her about her accident beforehand. Afterwards, being by far the most skilled swordsman in the dojo, Zoro is gifted Wado Ichimonji by Kuina's father. Growing tired of his little village, Zoro took Kuina's father's advice and left the island in order to find stronger opponents. This young Zoro then spent years building up a reputation throughout the East Blue, and he became much more feared than before. Despite spending most of his time lost by a complete accident, he'd unintentionally wind up in Shell's Town only days before Luffy's arrival. Zoro's battle with Axe-Hand Morgan and his men didn't last more than a second. After the battle, nobody dared ask him to leave, and he spent the next few days lounging around waiting for Luffy. Soon, the duo would reunite at the bar. They'd both immediately celebrate meeting each other again before leaving the island together. On their way to Orangetown, they'd share stories with each other about their solo adventures, talking about the things they did differently. At Orangetown, Zoro would point out how this place looks familiar, but off at the same time. That's when they'd come across Nami bossing around Buggy and his crew, making them fix up all the damage they caused. So, how did this happen? Well, to understand that, we need to look at what Nami had been up to since she was reborn. When Nami first opened her eyes again, she found herself being carried around a war-torn land by her sister Nojiko. Things went practically the same for Nami after that, except she was a lot more grateful for every moment she got with her mom. While growing up, Nami still continued to steal from other pirates, but this time, it was so her family could have a better life. With the money saved up, Nami then waited for Arlong's arrival, but he never arrived in this timeline. Why? Don't worry. We are going to explain that soon enough. Anyway, confused by this, Nami continued to polish her combat skills, becoming formidable with a staff. She also kept up with her cartography practice and read many books on the topic over the years. Once it finally came time for Nami to leave and reunite with the other Straw Hats, she didn't want to go, but her sister Nojiko convinced her, promising that she and Belmer would be just fine without her. That's when Nami decided to hitch a boat with Belmer's blessings and made her way to Orangetown. It wasn't long before she handled Buggy by herself, and his crew just gave in immediately after that. While the OG 3 Straw Hats were beginning to catch up with each other, Buggy and his crew would try to ambush them, but Luffy and Zoro would send them flying. Catching up over some tea with the Orangetown mayor, Nami left behind a good chunk of wealth for the townsfolk, which left Luffy and Zoro wondering what the hell happened to her. With 2 solid bumps on their heads, the boys would be surprised to learn Nami's obsession with money disappeared over time, since most of it came from the trauma of losing her mom in the original timeline. Soon after, they would leave Orangetown and arrive at the shores of Syrup Village. On the coast, they'd spot the Going Merry with the Usopp pirates living inside. You see, when Usopp was reborn, he found himself with his mother again. Only this time, Usopp spent more time cheering her up in his own way, telling her countless stories of his time with the Straw Hats. Once his mother passed away, Usopp grew closer to Kaya and foiled Captain Kuro's plan to betray her before it even began. He used his intellect to set traps and expose Kuro, and later chased him off of the island. In exchange for his help, Usopp requested Kaya to gift him the Going Merry, knowing that he'd soon need it when the other Straw Hats arrived. Luffy would be impressed, saying that Usopp took care of Kuro all by himself, and the crew would immediately continue their journey towards Barati. On the way there, Usopp showed his fellow crewmates a whole host of new weapons he had created over the years. He even sniped down the giant bird that tried to eat Luffy before. Upon their arrival, the Straw Hats would find the Barati have a special docking port specifically made for their ship. Let in by some of the other chefs, they'd get treated to an impressive feast meant solely for them. While other guests at the restaurant would get kicked out, Sanji would show up with tears in his eyes. What the others didn't know was that this time